Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. Our topics for tonight are parking lots versus collaboration and Assange's measure of justice. Hello, Dee. How are you? I'm going to wait for a second or two, or three or four, for a few people to arrive. I won't be long, though. For sure. Okay, let's get started with the first of our topics, parking lots versus collaboration. You'll soon see what that mysterious topic is about. I'm going to share the screen for a post from uns.com. It's by Mike Whitney, and the post is called, "If Tehran is turned into a parking lot, Israel will be soon to follow." And Mike published this on October 9th, just yesterday. A fairly long piece, 2,200 words. It's really a great piece. There's a picture of Netanyahu. Here's a quote from Naftali Bennett, former Israeli Prime Minister. "Israel now has its greatest opportunity in 50 years to change the face of the Middle East. We must act now to destroy Iran's nuclear program, its central energy facilities, and to fatally cripple this terrorist regime. We have the justification. We have the tools. Now that Hezbollah and Hamas are paralyzed, Iran stands exposed." I find this a strange quote from Bennett because I don't see that Hezbollah and Hamas are paralyzed at all. They, plus the Houthis and the Iraqi resistance and the Syrian resistance, seem to be giving the Israelis all they can handle and more. The Iranians themselves have been quiet since October 1st, but Israel has been taking a lot of punishment from the other folks. For Israel to achieve its regional ambitions, it must lure the U.S. into a war with Iran. In order to accomplish that feat, Israel must strike Iran with enough force to provoke a violent and destructive retaliation. As soon as it looks like Israel in trouble, the U.S. will ride to the rescue with, quote, "guns blazing," unquote. But first, Israel must initiate a provocation big enough to ensure the outcome that it seeks. In short, Israel's real target is the United States, because it is the U.S. that must be hoodwinked into fighting Israel's war. Regrettably, duping America is what Israel does best. Okay, so Americans are under the illusion that the United States will prevail in a war with Iran. But it's not true. Iran has been preparing for a war with the U.S. for over 2 decades, and they are ready to go. They have developed the missile technology that far exceeds anything currently available in the Pentagon's arsenal. And they're fully prepared to conduct a protracted asymmetrical war that will trigger a cataclysmic disruption of critical supply lines, followed by the thundering crash of global markets. Bottom line, if the U.S. attacks Iran, Washington is going to suffer a withering knockout blow that will end its dominance in the region and perhaps the world. And before I continue, let me just say that I entirely agree with this analysis by Mike Whitney. Up to this point, if the U.S. attacks Iran, we are going to suffer very, very badly, not directly here at home at first, but the global economy is going to be deprived of oil from the Middle East. It will crash. There will be crashes here and in Europe as well. And that particular knockout blow will end our dominance in West Asia and perhaps in the world as well. Going on with the article, the top brass in the Pentagon know this, as do many in the intelligence community. They know that a war with Iran is a bridge too far and a fast track to the dustbin of history. Haven't heard that expression in a long time. Used to be very, very common. We always used to get threats how we will end in the dustbin of history. But this time, it could happen. That is why Israel has delayed its retaliatory attack on Iran for so long. Yes, it's the 10th. And retaliation was coming since the 1st. Because Tel Aviv and the Pentagon are not on the same page. Even so, Netanyahu is charging ahead, assuming quite rightly that the U.S. will rescue Israel if its survival is seriously threatened by an Iranian missile attack. But make no mistake, U.S. generals and military leaders do not want this war. That is why Israel's attack on Iran has been delayed. It's not merely a matter of selecting the appropriate targets, as the media would like you to believe. It's a question of whether the United States is prepared to go to war with Iran and potentially its allies, Russia and China. It's worth noting that Russia's Prime Minister, specifically Mikhail Mishustin, visited Tehran just 2 days before Iran launched its ballistic missile attack on Israel on October 1st. It suggests that Iran got the green light from Moscow to take action that meets the legal definition of, quote, self-defense, unquote. Keep in mind, it's been 9 days since Iran attacked Israel and inflicted severe damage on military bases and a gas platform off the coast of Gaza. Most analysts expected Israel to respond immediately, which was what many of the Israeli leaders, including Netanyahu, had promised. But now, more than a week later, nothing has happened. And if you'll excuse me for a minute, I've been away from my computer for a little while. And I would like to see if there are any new reports while we are streaming that suggests that things have gone crazy in the Middle East. I don't see anything on YouTube that suggests that there has been a retaliation by Israel. Okay, as yet, I should have seen something by now. But no, there doesn't appear to be anything. So keep in mind, it's been 9 days since Iran attacked Israel and inflicted severe damage on military bases and gas platform. Yeah. But now, more than a week later, nothing has happened. And the reason nothing has happened is because there's a split between the gung-ho Israel firsters at the State Department and the White House and the sober-minded realists at the Pentagon. The Pentagon does not want a war with Iran. While the matter has not yet been settled, it looks like Bibi is about to pull the trigger with or without a formal declaration of U.S. support. Once again, Netanyahu assumes that if Israel gets into trouble, as it undoubtedly will, Uncle Sam will join the fight. The problem, of course, is the United States cannot win a conventional war with Iran. And if it tries to do so, it's going to see its military bases, airfields, and a sizable number of its servicemen vanish in a pillar of black smoke. Check out this blurb from Scott Ritter, who explains what lies ahead. Quote, this time from Scott Ritter, "Let's remember that when Trump was president, the Iranians shot down a Global Hawk drone worth over $100 million, which enraged Trump. And he said we need to strike the air defense sites that took down the Global Hawk. The Pentagon told him that if, quote, we do this, unquote, you are going to set into motion a cycle of escalation that will end with Iran destroying every single one of our military bases in the region, and there's nothing we can do to stop them, as well as shutting down the Strait of Hormuz and disrupting global oil supplies, triggering a collapse of the global economy." So this was said by the Pentagon to Trump when he was president. And you were going to order us to invade Iran, but we can't do that right now. It would take us months or years to assemble the forces needed to take the action you are talking about. And even then, there is no guarantee of victory. Quote, "Are you sure you want to do this, Mr. President?" Unquote. And Trump said, quote, "No," unquote. Well, of course, I don't know the exact date of this quote involving the Global Hawk drone, but it's been probably at least 6 to 7 years since then. And we've done nothing to build up our military to make us capable of contesting with Iran, while Iran, through this period, has been growing immensely stronger, especially when it comes to ballistic missile technology. And everybody knows it. That's me talking now, not the author Mike Whitney. The same calculus exists today, going back to the article. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have already been briefed on this reality. Donald Trump is already familiar with it. We cannot defeat Iran in a conventional fight. And here's the game changer. The IRGC, that's the Iran Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, came out with a press release saying, quote, "The Islamic faith allows things to change over time. If a threat emerges against the Islamic Republic, and if this threat does manifest itself, Iran will reconsider its stance on nuclear weapons." Iran is literally days away from being able to produce a nuclear weapon. If the U.S. or Israel wants to play nuclear games, Iran is ready to play that game. And this changes everything because Israel can no longer say, quote, we can nuke you, but you can't nuke us, unquote. Iran has put all the pieces together, and it would be a matter of days before they have a functioning nuclear device capable of being mounted on a missile that cannot be shot down, and that missile will be fired against Israel or American targets in the region. This is a game changer. The days of the United States intimidating Iran are over, past, finished. And the same with Israel. Israel can be wiped out tomorrow. Iran is prepared to fire 2,000 missiles at Israel in the span of a few hours. These missiles would destroy the entire infrastructure of Israel, including every power plant, every water purification plant. Everything that deals with modern civilized society will be eliminated because it can't be defended and because Israel has nothing to fall back upon. They will be literally bombed back to the Stone Age. And that's without using nuclear weapons. 3 to 5 nuclear weapons will wipe Israel off the face of the earth. There will be no Israel. That is the reality facing Israel today. That is the weakness that Benjamin Netanyahu has brought on the Israeli state and the Israeli people. This was from Scott Ritter and Judge Napolitano, The Middle East, 1 year after October 7, 2023, from YouTube at time 10:15 into the stream. And there's a little chart here. Countries attacked by bombing, sabotage, or attempted government overthrow since World War II. Under the heading of Iran, there's nothing. Absolutely nothing. Under the heading of the United States, there's China, 1945 to 6, Syria, 1949, Korea, 1950 to 53, China, 1950 to 53, Iran, 1953, Guatemala, 1954. It would take too long to read them all. So I'm just going to give an estimate. Looks like we're talking upwards of 60 countries here that were the beneficiaries of the tender, loving care of the United States. Going on with the article. While Ritter does an excellent job of explaining the potential pitfalls of any conflagration with Iran, other analysts have focused on the basic geography of the battlefield and how it might impact the outcome of the war. Here's an excerpt from an article that shows just how vulnerable U.S. bases in the region really are. Quote again, many U.S. service members in the Middle East are stationed at bases along the Persian Gulf in Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, and the eastern part of Saudi Arabia. Examples include the El Udeid Air Base in Qatar, the naval support activity Bahrain, and also Camp Arifjan in Kuwait. Maintaining a forward military presence in the Persian Gulf is vital to securing American English, but these bases are squarely within range of Iran's increasingly formidable arsenal of ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones. Making matters worse, Iran and its proxies have repeatedly demonstrated in recent years, I would say in recent days, that they are able and willing to use all three of these types of weapons systems to target U.S. and partner forces in the region. Iran has the largest ballistic missile arsenal in the region, with at least 8 types of short-range ballistic missiles, SRBMs, all of which are capable of striking U.S. bases along the Persian Gulf from Iranian territory. Ballistic missiles are particularly dangerous, as their high speed makes them more difficult to intercept compared to cruise missiles or drones once they are detected. Most of Iran's SRBMs employ solid propellants, meaning they require less time to prep prior to launch and can be fueled and stored for longer periods of time. But that is not enough. Congress should also press the Pentagon to replicate elsewhere vital military capabilities that currently reside solely or primarily at large vulnerable bases on the Persian Gulf near Iran, especially at Al Udeid. Alternatives should include a number of smaller bases in the region beyond the range of some Iranian capabilities. I'm sorry, somebody doesn't seem to realize that I am streaming. Alternatives should include a number of smaller bases in the region beyond the range of some Iranian capabilities. Don't over-concentrate U.S. forces in the Middle East. Does it sound like the authors are advising U.S. power brokers to get out of Dodge pronto to avoid an unprecedented catastrophe? Hang on a second, folks. You want me to take it? Oh, God. Okay, it's over. I will now continue. So, don't over-concentrate forces, in the Middle East. That was the name of the article from which this quote actually came. And the publication was FDD. And I'm afraid I don't know what FDD stands for. So if you do, let me know. Does it sound like the authors are advising U.S. power brokers to, quote, get out of Dodge pronto to avoid precedented catastrophe? Hang on a second, folks. I'm going to get rid of this.
Through hours and hours of his content in order to get to it.
Hey, guys.
Hello.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm very sorry, but I'm right in the middle of the stream. So goodbye. Idiots. Does it sound like the authors are advising U.S. power brokers to get out of Dodge pronto to avoid an unprecedented catastrophe? Does it sound like U.S. bases and personnel are overexposed and likely to be obliterated by Iran's state-of-the-art ballistic missiles? Does it sound like Bibi's vengeful retaliation cost American lives and compromise American interests? And here's a little map for you folks. The American flags, mark the location of U.S. bases surrounding Iran. And look at all of them. They're all within range of the short-range ballistic missiles the Iranians have. They don't even have to go to intermediate range ballistic missiles to hit these bases. It's incredible. How many of these bases are there? It's like 10, 14, 17, 22. Looks like there are 25 bases surrounding Iran within the range of their ballistic missiles. They probably already got them all targeted. And there's a little caption here. Look how close they put their country to our military bases. In our last article, Mike says, we focused on many of the same points we're emphasizing here. At the risk of being redundant, we'll include a brief clip from an earlier piece that illustrates the risks to American bases in the region. These U.S. aircraft are largely based at locations along the southern coast of the Arabian Gulf, an artifact of planning against Russian incursions in the 1970s and the Iraq and Afghanistan campaigns of the early decades of this century. They are close to Iran, which means they have a short trip to the fight. But that is also their great vulnerability. They're so close to Iran, it takes but 5 minutes or less for missiles launched from Iran to reach their bases. Most damagingly of all, these bases are all defended by Patriot and other defensive systems. Unfortunately, at such close range to Iran, the ability of the attacker to mass fires and overwhelm the defense is very real. In closing his roadmap to Tehran's victory, Mackenzie bitterly laments, quote, "It is hard to escape the conclusion that our current basing structure is poorly postured for the most likely fight that will emerge," unquote. The empire, quote again, will not be able to maintain these bases in a full-throated conflict because they will be rendered unusable by sustained Iranian attack, unquote. Imperial overreach in West Asia has now fallen victim to, quote, "the simple tyranny of geography," unquote. Quote, "The Iranians can see this problem just as clearly as we do. And that is one of the reasons why they have created their large and highly capable missile and drone force," unquote. The question of whether the battlefield primacy of the resistance in Asia will finally be comprehended by their adversaries in light of October 1st remains an open question. As Russian military strategist Igor Korchenko once observed, quote, "This Anglo-Saxon breed understands nothing but force," unquote. This is from Collapsing Empire, Iran Throws Down Gauntlet by Kit Klarenberg of Global Delinquents. Going on with the article. The Biden team needs to think long and hard about the move they are about to make. When an expert tells you that, quote, "our current basing structure is poorly postured for the fight that will emerge," unquote, what he means is that your bases, your people, and your weapon systems cannot be protected, and therefore they're doomed. And when that same expert tells you that you, quote, "will not be able to maintain these bases in a conflict because they will be rendered unusable by sustained Iranian attack," unquote, what he means is that your enemy is going to blow your entire operation to smithereens. Wouldn't it be wiser to mull these matters over instead of recklessly issuing another blank check to a genocidal madman who is merely using the U.S. to advance his own ethno-lunatic agenda? Of course, some will argue that if push comes to shove, the U.S. can always draw from its nuclear arsenal and turn Tehran into a parking lot. This is true, but it's also true that Iran has placed its hypersonic ballistic missiles in locations around the country, which means that if Iran is destined to become a parking lot, then Israel will meet the same exact fate. In fact, some would call that, quote, poetic justice, unquote. And there's a picture of Iran's axis of resistance working against the U.S. and Israel. In yellow are the network of armed groups with Iran-backed which have the militias backed by Iran. There's the West Bank, there's Gaza, there's Lebanon, there's Syria, there's Iraq. All these are supported by the Iranians and Yemen. I forgot to mention the Yemen because I forgot to scroll down. Breaking. The Iranian parliament is reportedly drafting a bill to create an official military alliance between all parties of the resistance axis, which includes Iran, Syria, Yemen, Iraq, Hezbollah, and Hamas. The bill mentions the creation of a joint operation room and a unified military infrastructure, as well as joint military exercises and an obligation to send military and humanitarian aid in case of any act of aggression by the U.S. or Israel against any one of the parties. And this quote is from Tasnim. So, that is the situation as Mike Whitney sees it. And it's also the situation as I see it. So there's a decision for Joe Biden to make. Well, there's a decision for Netanyahu to make also. He has to decide whether he's really going ahead with the retaliation. But he seems determined to do that. He seems to have been planning it for the last 10 days, and they're planning it carefully, I'm sure, and will throw everything they have into it. But I have reason to believe that when their retaliation on Iran starts, that in the first moments of that retaliation, most of which will come from planes, that there will be barrages of these ballistic missiles that will start out for Israel and start out for the American bases in the area. And these ballistic missiles will get to Israel before the Israeli attack actually gets to Iran. Because, of course, the ballistic missiles are faster than the F-35s. And I'm not sure how many F-35s Israel has to throw at Iran right now, because they might have lost a few or more than a few on October 1st. So Netanyahu has to make a decision, but if he makes the one we expect, then Iran is undoubtedly going to reply very, very strongly. And then Joe Biden will have to make a decision. Will he go in guns blazing? Or will he listen to the Pentagon and decide we cannot win such a war? Now note, we were not in a position to win such a war, even without the prospect of Russia coming in on Iran's side. That is really not mentioned in this discussion by Mike Whitney. He's just talking about the Iranian capability to reply. He's not talking about what Russia might do. He didn't even talk about what Russia has already done, which is specifically to cite S-400 systems, the most advanced anti-aircraft systems in the world currently, by all accounts. Russia has given a number of them, we don't know how many, to Iran. And we think that they're being manned or personed, if you will. They're being personed by Russian technicians. Also, word is that Russia has delivered some highly capable planes to Iran, and they will be flown also by Russians if such an attack occurs by Israel. So there is every capability to turn Iran into a parking lot. And I don't know that Mike is right when he says that Israel will be soon to follow. It may be that Israel will be turned into a parking lot first, before the Israeli retaliation actually gets to Iran. And yes, that retaliation may do considerable damage to Iran, but I personally doubt whether it's going to turn Iran into a parking lot, because I think those S-400s are going to have something to say about that. And by the way, the F-35s have not gone up against the S-400s yet. They've only gone up against some F-16s inside of Ukraine. They haven't gone up against the S-400s. And I don't know if many of them could escape the S-400s. Iran is large enough that even if some Israeli nukes get through, it will still be true that Iran survives. That assumes that Israel is going to use nukes. By the way, if Israel does use nukes, and if the Iranian nukes are not ready for retaliation, I suspect the Russians are going to deliver a few nukes to Israel in retaliation, for what they do to Iran. So my thinking on this subject is that Joe Biden has got to back off. There was some indication today at the UN, the representative from the US appeared to be making many remarks that were turning against Israel. That was a surprise. I haven't had a chance to watch that yet, so I don't know what kind of surprise, how big a surprise it is, whether it really represents a change in direction, on the part of the U.S. But I think it highly possible that Biden has decided finally to listen to the Pentagon and to tell the State Department people to STFU and sit down. He should have done that a long time ago, in my view. It never would have come to this had he done it a long time ago. But anyway, I hope he has done it now, that he's climbing down from the mountaintop, because we don't need him on top of the mountain right now. And we don't need this kind of war involving ballistic missiles against Iran. And Israel doesn't need it either, That's not what Israel needs. And people who think that Israel needs this have taken leave of their senses. That's all there is to that one. I'm now going to turn to your comments, and after I get those, okay, I'm going to go to Assange. I see some people have been trying to Facebook me. This from Shane, Darren, Andy, okay, and Lana. Certainly one of those at least knew that I was on a stream and I wasn't about to take a call. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Getting back to your comments, Robert Copeland doesn't like this article. He says it's full of garbage. Steve Wolfbrand says, hello, everybody. Turns out there are very few comments. I'm sorry to see that. There are 43 people here tonight who, on my indicator, are watching. There may be more people on Facebook than that, though. Actually, I didn't have a chance to stream I neglected to stream this to share this on my stream. So I'll do it now. Hopefully that will bring in a few more people. Okay, anyway, okay, I'm going to go on to the Assange piece I have for you tonight. So let me share that. I'm going to try to get done by 9 o'clock tonight because I have a number of other things to do that will not wait. I picked this one up from LA Progressive. I think it's very important. Okay, it's by Marjorie Cohn, so it must have first appeared in Truth Out. Let me just check that before I proceed. Yes, it did appear in Truth Out, so usually I pick up things there, but this time I didn't. And I got it from Los Angeles Progressive. Headline is Free at Last. Assange receives a measure of justice from the Council of Europe. The tagline says, in its first public statement since his release, Julian Assange said, quote, I'm free today because I pled guilty to journalism, unquote. This was done on October 7th. There's a painting of Assange or a poster of Assange. Quite a piece of art. The Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, PACE, Europe's foremost human rights body, overwhelmingly adopted a resolution on October 2nd, formally declaring WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange a political prisoner. The Council of Europe, which represents 64 nations, expressed deep concern at the harsh treatment suffered by Assange, which has had a chilling effect, quote unquote, on journalists and whistleblowers around the world. In the resolution, PACE notes that many of the leaked files that WikiLeaks published, quote, provide credible evidence of real war crimes, human rights abuses, and government misconduct, unquote. The resolutions also, quote, confirmed the existence of secret prisons, kidnappings, and illegal transfers of prisoners by the United States on European soil, unquote. According to the terms of a plea deal with the U.S. Department of Justice, Julian Assange pled guilty on June 25th to one count of conspiracy to obtain documents, writings, and notes connected with the national defense under the U.S. Espionage Act. Without the deal, he was facing 175 years in prison for 18 charges in an indictment filed by the Trump administration and pursued by the Biden administration, stemming from WikiLeaks' publication of evidence of war crimes committed by the U.S. in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Guantanamo Bay. After his plea, Assange was released from custody with credit for the 5 years he had spent in London's maximum security Belmarsh prison. The day before PACE passed its resolution, Assange delivered a powerful testimony to the Council of Europe's Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights. This was his first public statement since his release from custody 4 months ago, after 14 years of confinement, 9 in the Ecuadorian embassy in London and 5 in Belmarsh. Quote, freedom of expression and all that flows from it is at a dark crossroads, unquote, Assange told the parliamentarian. A quote, chilling effect in a climate of self-censorship, unquote. The resolution says that, quote, the disproportionately harsh charges, unquote, the U.S. filed against Assange under the Espionage Act, quote, which expose him to a risk of de facto life imprisonment, together with his conviction for what was essentially the gathering and publication of information, unquote, justified classifying him as a political prisoner under the definition set forth in a PACE resolution from 2012, defining the term Assange's 5-year incarceration in Belmarsh prison was disproportionate to the alleged offense, unquote. Notifying that Assange is, quote, the first publisher to be prosecuted under the Espionage Act for leaking classified information obtained from a whistleblower, unquote. The resolution expresses concern about the, quote, chilling effect and a climate of self-censorship for all journalists, editors, and others who raise the alarm on issues that are essential to the functioning of democratic societies. The resolution also notes that, quote, information gathering is an essential preparatory step in journalism, unquote, which is protected by the right to freedom of expression guaranteed by the European Court of Human Rights. The resolution cites the conclusion of Niels Melzer, UN Special Rapporteur on torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment, that Assange had been exposed to increasingly severe forms of cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment, the cumulative effects of which can only be described as psychological torture. Condemning, quote, transnational repression, unquote, PACE was, quote, alarmed by reports that the CIA was discreetly monitoring Mr. Assange in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, and that it was allegedly planning to poison or even assassinate him on British soil. The CIA has raised the, quote, state secrets, unquote, privilege in a civil lawsuit filed by 2 attorneys and 2 journalists over that illegal surveillance. In the U.S., quote, the concept of state secrets is used to shield executive officials from criminal prosecution for crimes such as kidnapping and torture, or to prevent victims from claiming damages. The resolution notes, but, quote, the responsibility of state agents for war crimes or serious human rights violations, such as assassination and forced disappearances, torture, or abductions does not constitute a secret that must be protected, unquote. Moreover, the resolution expresses deep concern that according to publicly available evidence, no one has been held to account for the war crimes and human rights violations committed by U.S. state agents and decries, quote, the culture of impunity, unquote. The resolution says there is no evidence anyone has been harmed by WikiLeaks publications and, quote, regrets that despite Julian Assange's disclosure of thousands of confirmed, previously unreported deaths by U.S. and coalition forces in Iraq and Afghanistan, he has been the one accused of endangering lives, unquote. Assange's testimony. The testimony Assange provided to the committee was poignant. Quote, I eventually chose freedom over realizable justice. Justice for me is now precluded, unquote. Julian Assange testified, quote, I am not free today because the system worked. I am free today after years of incarceration because I pled guilty to journalism, unquote. He added, quote, I pled guilty to seeking information from a source. I pled guilty to obtaining information from a source. And I pled guilty to informing the public what that information was, unquote. His source was whistleblower Chelsea Manning, who provided the documents and reports to WikiLeaks. Quote, journalism is not a crime, unquote, Assange said. Quote, it is a pillar of a free, informed society. And here, okay, I have to interject. Journalism is essential for democracy. And in attacking Assange and attacking journalism using the Espionage Act, the government of the United States has moved to undermine democracy in this nation. It has been disloyal to the Constitution. It has been disloyal to democracy. It has moved towards becoming a totalitarian state. Going on with the article. Assange described the transition from the years he spent in a maximum security prison to testifying before the European parliamentarians as a quote, profound and serial shift. Speaking of his isolation for years in a small cell, he said, quote, it strips away anyone's sense of self, leaving only the raw essence of existence, unquote, Assange said. Quote, I'm not yet fully equipped to speak about what I have endured. The relentless struggle to stay alive, both physically and mentally. Nor can I speak yet about the death by hanging, murder, and medical neglect of my fellow prisoners, unquote. Perhaps the most infamous publication by WikiLeaks was the 2007, quote, the collateral murder, unquote, video, which depicts a U.S. Army Apache attack helicopter crew targeting and killing 12 unarmed civilians in Baghdad, including 2 journalists of Reuters, as well as a man who came to rescue the wounded. The release of that video, quote, stirred public debate, unquote, Assange testified. Quote again, now every day there are live streaming horrors from the wars in Ukraine and the war in Gaza, unquote, he cited. Quote, hundreds of journalists, unquote, killed in those wars. Addressing the danger journalists face, Assange declared, quote, the criminalization of news gathering activities is a threat to investigative journalism everywhere. I was formally convicted by a foreign power for asking for receiving and publishing truthful information about that power, unquote, he noted. Quote again, the fundamental issue is simple. Journalists should not be prosecuted for doing their jobs, unquote. In fact, I have to add again, prosecuting journalists for doing their jobs is unconstitutional on the face of it. On the face of the Constitution, it is unconstitutional. Government shall make no law restricting the freedom of the press. And yet, it applied a law that in its application undermined the freedom of the press by imprisoning Assange, by forcing him to plead guilty to journalism. This is shameful, unforgivable, unacceptable. The people who did this in both administrations should be hauled before the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity. Going on, Assange predicted, quote, more impunity, more secrecy, more retaliation for telling the truth, and more self-censorship, unquote, in the future. Quote, journalists must be activists for the truth, unquote, he said, mentioning the importance of, quote, but journalistic solidarity. There was very little journalistic solidarity supporting Assange. The paper of record, the New York Times, so-called paper of record, certainly did not show him any journalistic solidarity. The Washington Post didn't show him any journalistic solidarity. The Los Angeles Times did not. Any of the major journalistic outlets here in the United States failed. Of course, the cable news networks, big fail. And the same was true of news outlets in other nations as well. Throughout the so-called free world, all acted on the side of those who wanted to undermine democracy. Going on, although Assange expected some sort of legal harassment as a result of WikiLeaks publications and was ready to, quote, fight for that, unquote, he said, quote, my naivete was believing in the law. When push comes to shove, laws are just pieces of paper and they can be reinterpreted for political expediency. And that is the shame of it. That is the shame of it, my friends. Going on with Assange. Assange observed that laws are made by the ruling class, who simply reinterpret them when the rules don't serve their ends. Describing the legal process in his case, Assange noted that, quote, all judges, whether they were finding in my favor or not in the United Kingdom, showed extraordinary deference to the United States, unquote. Yes, they did. It was ridiculous. And it was shameful on the part of the United Kingdom also. Pace urges the U.S. to investigate war crimes. The resolution calls on the U.S., the U.K., the member and observer states of the Council of Europe, and media outlets to take actions to address its concerns. It calls on the U.S. and observer state to reform the Espionage Act of 1917 to exclude from its operation journalists, editors, and whistleblowers who disclose classified information with the aim of informing the public of serious crimes such as torture or murder. In order to obtain a conviction for violation of the act, the government should be required to prove a malicious intent to harm national security. It also calls on the United States to investigate the allegations of war crimes and other human rights violations exposed by Assange and WikiLeaks. Pace called on the UK to review its extradition laws to exclude extradition for political offences. I understand UK's extradition laws now exclude extradition for political offences. Going on, though, as well as conduct an independent review of the conditions of Assange's confinement while at Belmarsh to see if it constituted torture or inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment. In addition, the resolution urges the states of the Council of Europe to further improve their protections for whistleblowers and to adopt strict guidelines to prevent governments from classifying documents as defense secrets when those classifications are not warranted. Finally, the resolution urges media outlets to establish rigorous protocols for handling and verifying classified information to ensure responsible reporting and avoid any risk to national security and the safety of informants and sources. Although PACE doesn't have the authority to make laws, it can urge the states of the Council of Europe to take action. Since Assange never had the opportunity to litigate the denial of his right to freedom of expression, the resolution of the Council of Europe is particularly significant as he seeks a pardon from U.S. President Joe Biden. Again, this article, was by Marjorie Cohn, who was citing all the various things that Julian Assange had to say. It's a great piece, of course. It makes us realize how far towards undermining democracy we have come, in our country, and how necessary empowering democracy is because of the undermining that we have accomplished. So, I am back. Steve Vornpret said, "Happy birthday, Lana Dell." John B. said, "Is not merely disloyal to the Constitution, Joe. It is in contempt of the U.S. Constitution." Of course, I agree. I absolutely agree, John B. And I'm glad you showed up to say so. John B. says, "Israel is actually doing to journalists publicly is what the U.S. strives for covertly." That is also true, though somehow Gidon Levy has been able to escape retaliation by the Israeli state so far, and to still write the truth, and to speak it also when he goes on shows like this one. John B. says, the UK need to explain why they held Assange in solitary confinement in Belmarsh. That action in itself is a blatant abuse of so-called, quote, British justice, unquote. Yes, and full reparations are owed. Not just a pardon, but full reparations are owed to Assange for his mistreatment by the British in solitary confinement for those years. That was awful. It was utterly awful. Well, folks, that's all I have time for tonight. I have some private things, I have to do. Thank you very much for coming. I believe I will see you on Saturday night. It's possible that I may not see you, but I will certainly do my best to come back on Saturday night. But I have some personal business I've been taking care of, and it's been taking some time. But as of now, I do plan to come back on Saturday night, and I do believe that I will have the time to do so. On Saturday night, I will be streaming at 9 p.m. Tomorrow, okay, I will be off. Okay, have a wonderful evening, have a wonderful tomorrow, and have a wonderful Saturday. And I will see you again as soon as I can.